From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefanía Bravo. This is From the South. Investigations continue at the Santander Police School in Bogotá to determine the motives behind Thursday's bomb attack. The Attorney General and the Defense Minister said that one suspect was arrested during the early morning hours. The government has also accused the National Liberation Army for the attack. The group has yet to make a statement, but has unofficially denied that it ordered the attack. At least 21 people were killed and 68 wounded in the incident. Meanwhile, the United Nations has urged Colombia to clarify the attack and bring those responsible to justice. The Secretary General Antonio Guterres has sent his condolences to the relatives of the 21 victims. The UN office in Colombia described the attack as, quote, an unacceptable criminal act, which goes against the efforts the country is making to steer away from violence. Now, different movements and human rights organizations in the country are making a call for Colombians to keep working for peace.
This attack, as well as all the murders and threats that many leaders in the country have been suffering for the last 2 years, is an attack to peace. We call on all Colombians not to lose hope, nor their interest in the building of peace, because we have the right to live in a new country.
Our correspondent in Bogotá, Tatiana Portela, has the latest.
Well, there are still a lot of investigators at the police academy searching for evidence. Just minutes ago, a news conference was held by Attorney General Nestor Humberto Martinez, Defense Minister Guillermo Botero, and the High Commissioner for Peace, Miguel Zaballos. They said that early this morning, authorities captured a person identified as Ricardo Andres Carbaja. The 32-year-old was arrested at his home in the south of the country. Authorities say he was identified as being involved in the explosion while he was communicating by phone with the accused bomber, Jose Aldemar. Aldemar was identified yesterday as the person who was inside the Nissan when it entered the police school and crashed into a room. The Attorney General today alleged that the ELN army was involved, but the group has not claimed responsibility. We are waiting for an official communique from the Central Command of the ELN denying or accepting the participation in that attack. And finally, we must say that after some journalists asked if Venezuela financed the attack, the Attorney General said that right now they are only asking the Venezuelan government to verify the presence in Venezuelan territory of, quote, several guerrilla commanders of the National Liberation Army, end quote. However, they emphasize that they have not found anything linking Venezuela's government to this incident.
And President Iván Duque has declared 3 days of national mourning. He also announced that he ordered tighter control over Colombian borders as well as over access points to several cities. Following the bomb attack in Bogotá, Colombian students and other social movements suspended their planned protest. The students had called their march to demand the dismantling of the SMAT riot squad. They accused it of using extreme violence against students' demonstrations last year. They also want more funding for universities. Other movements are calling for the resignation of the Attorney General. Moving on, around 200 people from the latest group of asylum seekers from Central America reached the Mexico border on Thursday. The group entered southwest Mexico around midday and are headed for the United States. According to Guatemalan authorities, 2,000 people are taking part in this caravan, which departed from Honduras on Tuesday. And a reported 100 people in the caravan were given a bracelet allowing them to enter Mexico. They allow them free movement and work within the country. According to migration authorities, 600 bracelets have already been put out on members of the migrant caravan.
I think the Mexican government, which has helped us Hondurans every step of the way, offered us a card to remain in the country of Mexico for a year.
The mission I have with my son is to get to the United States, but let's see how things go.
Our correspondent in Guatemala, Mario Rosales, has the details.
Here in Guatemala, hundreds of Hondurans have passed the border through the western department of San Marcos up to the southern state of Chiapas. In the early morning hours of Friday, an unknown number of Hondurans were seen walking crossing the border in a very orderly fashion. This markedly different from what we witnessed in October 2018 with the very first large caravan. We recall the exclusive footage presented by Telesur of the helicopters which the government of Enrique Peña Nieto flew over the Suchiate River and circled around in provocation. Central American migrants could have drowned in that river, but eventually crossed in an orderly fashion. The Interior Minister has provided centers for migrants to identify themselves. Here in Guatemala, migrants continue arriving to the capital and to what's called the Migrant House to join the large group which has already made it into the Mexican territory on its journey to the United States.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Officials in Mexico say that since December, at least 435 people have been detained in the fight against oil theft led by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. The Deputy Attorney of Regional Control, Roberto Ochoa Romero, says between December 1st and January 16th, the public ministry opened more than 1,800 investigations. He says 165 people are facing charges, while 45 others are in prison. Ochoa also added that more than 1,000 thefts have been identified and some 4 million liters of various fuels have been seized. The number of disappeared in Mexico is now more than 40,000, and the number of unidentified dead is more than 36,000. This is according to Roberto Cabrera, leader of the National Search Commission. Cabrera made the announcement as he resigned from the position. The commission was created a year ago, along with a new database called the National Registry of Missing and Non-Located Persons. It contains digital records of the victims, including their full names, photographs, and fingerprints. Salvadorians have marked 27 years since a peace agreement was signed in Mexico, ending its long-lasting civil war.
Hundreds of Salvadorans attended the commemoration of the signing of the peace deal that ended 12 years of armed conflict in the country, which left thousands dead and missing. Diplomats from countries that supported the peace negotiations also attended the event.
That day, on January 16, 1992, we ended decades of repression and pain. We left behind an era marked by a cruel dictatorship that sought to silence people with violent and inhumane methods. Today, we honor the legacy of the Peace Pact that allows us to enjoy a better today and look into the future with both hope and optimism.
The celebration was meant to reaffirm the commitment of all Salvadorans to democracy, peace, progress, and development.
We already have the guarantee for people to fully exercise their rights, the freedom to have opinions, to decide, to organize, to build any project. This is important for the thousands who fought and died for these values. They didn't die for nothing, and it is for coming generations who aspire to build a more democratic future.
In a festive mood, songs were performed in honor of the peace achieved 27 years ago, and they celebrated the creation of a new, more advanced democracy.
To become a country that is permanently built on democratic values. That is what we, Salvadoran people, wish from the depths of our hearts. We are people who suffered a lot to build democracy. It cost us 100,000 lives and the destruction of the productive infrastructure of the country.
With the support of the United Nations, many sectors of Salvadoran society seek to bring a second generation of agreements that will tackle the new economic and social challenges the country is currently facing.
Social organizations in Chile have called for a march on January 27th to reject the recent approval of a bill that regulates the country's immigration policy. Promoted by the government of Sebastián Piñera, the project controls arrival and residence, as well as the departure of foreign citizens. Social organizations warn that the project does not solve the needs of the migrant population. They say it increases inequality and slows the process of migrants' integration. Dozens of fishing industry workers in Chile have marched to the presidential palace to protest against a bill that restricts the fishing of cuttlefish. The workers are worried that the new law will take away the livelihood and make it impossible for them to provide for their families. The bill that was recently approved in Congress prohibits trolling.
They are taking away the quota of cuttlefish, and many people are going to stay unemployed. That's why we're here, so that they listen to us, because the president has done something alone without consulting us. This is the only way for us to be heard.
And Puerto Ricans protested against a deal created by the government to tackle the island's growing public debt.
Hundreds of people gathered in front of the federal court, which prompted police to close a section of the Chardin Avenue. Spokespeople for various social organizations present at the event hailed the demonstration as a success.
What the United States is doing to Puerto Rico is too intense. It is just too much when we face debt, a fiscal control board, and the whole federal court. We look at the damage it will cause if what they propose is carried out. We have had 40 years to pay debt, and it will definitely eliminate the possibility of Puerto Rico becoming a free and sovereign nation.
Was the federal judge responsible for restructuring the Puerto Rico debt evaluated whether they would ratify the agreement between the government and COFINA creditors, protesters outside the court condemned the deal and its consequences for the people of Puerto Rico.
This is real resistance, in which one action comes after another. People are seeing their family and friends on the street protesting for the first time. People are waking up to how the deeds of the junta and the colonial system have affected their lives, pockets, and future opportunities.
This clearly shows how what is happening in the country is completely ignored. There's misinformation. More than 200,000 people are affected by these agreements. All sectors are going to be harmed. Teachers, students, the police.
Independence activist Salvador Tio has strongly criticized the U.S. measures against Puerto Rico. He says there's a hidden geopolitical interest for controlling other Caribbean regions and Latin America, especially Venezuela.
Puerto Rico is realizing that colonialism impoverishes you. They say that there is a dictatorship in Venezuela, even though the president was elected by a majority of 4 million. Here, there is a fiscal control board that is deciding the next 40 to 50 years of pensions, universities and schools that nobody voted for. Which one is the dictatorship? It's a dictatorship of the United States. And that's why what's happening is important for Venezuela, aside from us being Latino brothers, as with the Cubans and Dominicans. The United States is setting foot in the Caribbean, into Puerto Rico, so that they can have a frontier from which they can prepare troops to overthrow the elected and constitutional government of Nicolás Maduro.
As part of the demonstration, civic, political and social organizations prepared pamphlets to explain how these agreements about the Puerto Rico debt are designed to benefit the United States and the members of Fiscal Control Board.
Guyana's opposition leader says that the Electoral Commission is being influenced by the government in a bid to stop preparations for a general election. Bharat Jagdeo says the commission could be using delay tactics as it is yet to issue an official statement about its readiness for early polls. In a surprise defeat last month, Guyana's parliament voted in favor of a no-confidence motion in the government, triggering fresh general elections in March. And the National Museum of Brazil in Rio de Janeiro has launched its first exhibition since the devastating fire in September. The exhibition on new discoveries in Antarctica is being held at the original site of the National Museum. It features 160 pieces of Antarctic rocks and fossils, including pieces that were salvaged from the fire. September's fire destroyed the vast majority of the over 20 million objects at the museum. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. The White House says U.S. President Donald Trump will meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un next month. The two are expected to continue talks over the North's nuclear program and U.S. sanctions. The exact date and location have not been announced, but a tweet from the official White House account said Trump is, quote, looks forward to a second summit with Chairman Kim. 5 suspects, including a Canadian citizen, have appeared in a Kenyan court in connection with the Islamist attack on a Naibori hotel complex. The magistrate granted a request from the prosecution to detain the 4 men and 1 woman for 30 days while the investigation continues. A total of 11 suspects were arrested after Tuesday's attack, but investigations into the others are still ongoing. Mourners took to the streets in Sudan to demonstrate after attending the funeral of a protester killed during anti-government rallies a day earlier. Deadly protests have rocked Sudan since December 19th, when the government decided to raise the price of bread. The rallies have since escalated into broader demonstrations against President Omar al-Bashir, triggering clashes between protesters and security forces. Supporters of former Ivory Coast leader Laurent Gbagbo are celebrating after International Criminal Court judges confirmed he was to be released. International Criminal Court judges rejected a request from the prosecutors to keep Gbagbo in custody following his acquittal on charges of crimes against humanity. After hearing the judgment, a group of Gbagbo supporters celebrated outside the court by chanting, waving Ivorian flags, or drinking champagne.
We are so overwhelmed with joy. We are completely excited. We are proud of that. He went through it with dignity. He endured, and we think that it was for a cause and that the message was clear. I'm innocent and I'm standing for the whole of Africa. And so we are really proud. We are proud. Justice prevailed. The truth came out and is coming out the right way.
Western classical music is thriving in South Africa's Black communities. It was first brought by missionaries spreading Christianity in the 1700s. African religious practices and rituals slowly declined as the Bible replaced the former way of life. Many decades later, Africans embraced Western classical music and it became part of their lives.
She is a third generation in a family of classical musicians. Esther Homo makes a living as a pianist, a talent she developed in Soweto where she grew up. Her repertoire includes composers like Mozart, Bach and many other renowned European masters. But she says South Africa has produced some of her favorite composers and she enjoys playing their music.
Namia is the first one because this was playing it's the first piano accompanying score that I saw, and it had different characters in it. A bit of jazz, a bit of classical, a bit of African music, and I loved the combination of the three.
South Africa has also produced internationally acclaimed classical musicians. Operatic soprano Priti Yende is now a household name in major opera houses around the world. Most local classical musicians have to leave the country to reach the peak of their careers. Esther believes it's because there isn't enough investment in the arts.
It shouldn't be happening. I think our government should be respecting artists more, this brain drain should have been, stopped a while ago. And, music students in performance get frustrated if they don't get gigs. And, sometimes they are shunned, by the very musicians that are supposed to give them the backing.
Western classical music may well be the legacy of a violent colonial past that took so much away from the indigenous people of South Africa. But today, the music plays with deep appreciation after becoming part of a history that raised women like Esther. Matiwa Mahlachi, Telesur, Pretoria.
Two journalists have been shot by Israeli soldiers in Gaza while covering the weekly Friday protest, which is part of the Great March of Return. Both reporters were wearing clearly marked press vests. At least 14 Palestinians were also injured during the protest. Israel security forces frequently target journalists covering the Great March of Return. 2 reporters were killed in 2018. This month marks the 10th anniversary of the Gaza War, an offensive launched by Israel that killed more than 1,400 Palestinians. Also known as Operation Cast Lead, the 22-day military assault on the Gaza Strip was carried out by air, sea, and land. According to human rights organizations, 308 miners were killed in the attack. More than 5,000 people were also wounded. These organizations also found evidence that this was a deliberate military offensive targeting more than 2 million Palestinians. Our correspondent in the Middle East, Nayara Tardo, has the details.
New attacks were reported in the Gaza Strip by Israel against the boats of Palestinian fishermen. It was also reported that Israeli bulldozers approached the city of Rafah. Local media says that this is happening on the same day that the Great March of Return started in the border with Israel, joined by hundreds of Palestinians protesting against the Israeli occupation of their territories. Fishermen and farmers have denounced that this attack against them is affecting the agriculture sector in Gaza and the lives and development of the residents. Today's the Great March of Return coincides with the 10th anniversary of the Gaza War that was launched by Israel on December 27, 2008, and ended 22 days later, on January 18, 2009, one of the deadliest attacks to the Gaza Strip, leaving more than 1,400 Palestinians dead, most of them civilians.
We thank Nayara for that report. And now to the UK. Theresa May's government is still in deep crisis despite surviving Wednesday's no confidence vote. Our correspondent Pablo Navarrete has the latest from London.
The ayes to the right, 306.
This Wednesday, British Prime Minister Theresa May narrowly won a motion of no confidence, which took place one day after the rejection by Parliament of her government's Brexit agreement with the European Union. In normal circumstances, May's defeat by 230 votes, the greatest loss in British history, would have resulted in her resigning and a general election being called. But the prospect of Jeremy Corbyn, the socialist leader of the Labour Party, as the UK's next Prime Minister, has caused concern in the British establishment.
I think there is a very high chance that if we go to a general election, Jeremy Corbyn would be in number 10 at the end of that. And that is precisely also why I think that the British establishment is very much against a general election, why the government currently is very much against a general election, and why ultimately a lot of members of Parliament, possibly even inside of the Labour Party, are against a general election.
Sectors within the Labour Party, including a significant number of MPs, have been accused of subverting Corbyn's leadership. When he first became Labour leader, the media and the political right often painted him as inept and buffoonish. Now he is more often than not portrayed as a dangerous extremist.
What they did was massively underestimate the political alienation of the population at large and how ready and waiting they were, essentially, for a committed politician that would represent their interests.
In the current political conjuncture, Corbyn is in a difficult position. A section of his supporters voted to leave the EU, while another influential group voted to remain and are now demanding that Corbyn call a second Brexit referendum.
Ordinary people in this country don't really understand what Brexit represents and what it involves, partly because the elites in this country and the so-called political experts in this country have very little understanding of what's happening and what's going to happen. It's just very, very unclear.
The uncertainty surrounding Brexit and the profound political crisis in which the Theresa May government finds itself means there is a generalised sense of unease amongst the population as to what the future will hold. Pablo Navarrete, Telesur, London.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.